On Christmas Eve 1945, the Sodder family went to bed expecting Christmas morning. Instead, sometime around 1 a.m., their home in Fayetteville, West Virginia, caught fire. George and Jennie Sodder escaped with some of their children, but 5 of their children were still believed to be upstairs. Their names were Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty. By morning, the house was gone, and the 5 children were missing. George and Jennie had 10 children. That night, 9 of them were at home. 1 son was away. When the fire started, 4 of the children escaped with their parents. The youngest, 2-year-old Sylvia, was also safe, but George believed 5 children were still on the 2nd floor. He tried to get back inside, but smoke and fire had already spread through the downstairs rooms. He tried another way. He kept a ladder against the house, but that ladder was missing. Then he tried to start his 2 coal trucks and use one to reach the upstairs windows. Neither truck would start. Even the rain barrel was frozen. The family had almost no way to reach the children upstairs. One of the surviving children ran to a neighbor's house to call the fire department, but the call did not immediately reach anyone. Another neighbor tried from a nearby tavern. Again, there was no response. A neighbor eventually found the fire chief himself. The local fire department used a phone tree, with one firefighter calling another. The department was only about 2.5 miles away, but the firefighters did not reach the Sodder property until around 8 a.m. By then, the house had been reduced to a smoking pile of ash. The family expected to find the remains of the 5 missing children, but the first search found no human remains, and that is where the story became much harder to explain. The official explanation was that the fire had been caused by faulty electrical wiring. The state police inspector who investigated the fire reached that conclusion. The coroner's office issued death certificates for the 5 missing children, listing their causes of death as fire or suffocation. But George and Jennie Sodder were not convinced. They had questions about what happened that night. One of the biggest was simple. If the 5 children had died inside the house, why had no remains been found? Jennie began looking closely at the fire herself. She later conducted her own simple experiments by burning animal bones. Each time she was left with pieces of bone. She also learned from a crematorium employee that human bones normally leave remains after cremation. To Jennie, this made the absence of the children's remains difficult to accept. But there is an important distinction. Her experiments did not prove that the children had survived. They only strengthened the family's doubts about the official explanation. Then the family noticed another detail. A telephone repairman told the Sodders that their telephone line appeared to have been cut. The family also remembered that the lights downstairs had been on when Jennie woke during the fire. These details raised a question about the electrical fire explanation, but they did not establish that someone had deliberately started the fire. The Sodders were beginning to suspect that something more had happened that night, but suspicion was not proof. The Sodders were not only questioning the fire, they also remembered several strange events from the months before it. One man who had visited George about hauling work had pointed toward the family's fuse boxes and warned that the house would one day have a fire. Another man, an insurance salesman, became angry after George refused to buy a policy. He made a threatening remark about the house burning and the children being destroyed. George had also been openly critical of Benito Mussolini, but none of these details proved that either man had anything to do with the fire. They remained just that, suspicions. There was another detail from the night of the fire. Just after midnight, the telephone rang. Jennie answered. An unfamiliar woman asked for someone who did not live there. Jennie told her she had the wrong number and hung up. She later remembered hearing laughter and the sound of glasses in the background. Then, before going back to sleep, Jennie noticed that the downstairs lights were still on and the front door was unlocked. She closed the curtains, locked the door, and returned to bed. Not long afterward, she heard a loud bang on the roof. Then came a rolling sound. About half an hour later, smoke filled the house. The family also heard about a man seen near the property during the fire. A witness claimed he saw someone taking engine removal equipment. The man was later identified and pleaded guilty to stealing, but he denied having anything to do with the fire. There were also reports of people seeing the missing children after the fire. One woman claimed she saw them in a car during the fire. Another said she saw the children at a tourist stop the following morning. A woman at a hotel in Charleston later said she had seen 4 of them, about a week after the fire. But these sightings were never established as proof. They became leads in a case where the family had almost no physical evidence. In the years after the fire, the Sodders continued searching for answers. Then in 1949, they decided to investigate the remains of the house again. A Washington, D.C. pathologist named Oscar Hunter examined material recovered during an excavation of the site. Among the items were several small objects and a few pieces of vertebrae. The bones were sent to the Smithsonian Institution for examination. The result raised another question. The Smithsonian report said the bones came from one person who appeared to have been around 16 or 17 years old, but the oldest of the 5 missing Sodder children was only 14. That did not prove the children had survived, but it gave the family another reason to question the official conclusion. The Smithsonian's findings led to further hearings in Charleston, West Virginia. But authorities did not reopen the case. Instead, officials told the family that their search was hopeless and considered the case closed. George and Jennie refused to accept that conclusion. They put up a large billboard along Route 16. It showed photographs of the 5 missing children and offered a reward for information. The family also distributed flyers. They wanted the public to keep looking. The billboard brought attention to the case, and with that attention came more tips. Some people claimed they had seen one or more of the children after the fire. One letter claimed Martha was living in a convent in St. Louis. Another tip came from Texas. Someone else claimed the children were staying with a relative in Florida. But none of these reports was confirmed. For the Sodder family, every new lead created another possibility. For investigators, they were unverified claims. And after years of searching, the central question still had no proven answer. What happened to the 5 children after the fire? The search continued for years. George and Jennie followed leads across the country, but none gave them a confirmed answer. Then, in the late 1960s, Jennie received a small envelope postmarked in Kentucky. Inside was a photograph of a young man. On the back was a handwritten message identifying him as Louis Sodder, one of the children who disappeared in the fire. The man in the photograph looked similar to the Louis the family remembered, but there was a problem. There was no independent proof that the man was actually Louis. The family hired a private investigator and sent him to Kentucky. They never received a confirmed answer. The family never publicly proved that the photograph showed Louis. Instead, they added the image to the billboard that had stood along Route 16 for years. The billboard became one of the most recognizable symbols of the case. George Sodder died in 1969, still without knowing what had happened to his 5 children. Jennie continued to search for answers until her death in 1989. The billboard was eventually taken down, but the question it carried remained. Were the 5 children victims of the fire, or had something happened before the flames consumed the house? The evidence has never provided a definitive answer. After decades of searching, the Sodder family's theory remained just that, a theory. There is no confirmed evidence that the 5 children were kidnapped. There is also no confirmed evidence that they survived the fire. The strongest physical evidence came from the 1949 excavation. Investigators found 4 lumbar vertebrae. The Smithsonian examination estimated that they belonged to one person who appeared to be around 16 or 17 years old. But the report also said the bones could have belonged to a boy around 14 and a half. And importantly, the Smithsonian concluded that the bones were probably already present in the dirt used to fill the basement after the fire. So even the bone evidence does not give us a definitive answer. There are also the reported sightings. Some witnesses claimed they saw the children after the fire, but none of those sightings was independently confirmed. The same is true of the photograph that Jennie received decades later. The man in it looked remarkably similar to Louis Sodder, but there was never enough evidence to establish that the man really was Louis. That leaves us with something important. The case contains many unusual details, but unusual does not automatically mean proven. And after all these years, there is still no verified evidence showing what happened to Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie and Betty after the fire. The family's billboard eventually came down, but the mystery never received a final answer. Today we can say what is known. A house burned on Christmas Eve in 1945. 5 children were never seen again. Authorities concluded that they had died in the fire. Their parents never accepted that conclusion, and despite decades of searching, no explanation has ever been proven beyond doubt. That is why the Sodder children remain one of America's most enduring missing person mysteries.